Good evening, everybody. This is Gerudo King, and today I'm going to be reading the Book of Esther, and I'm going to be reading part two of the Book of Esther by Vladimir Gelesnoff, titled Out of the Eater Came Forth the Meat. Since I had absolutely no idea what that means, I figured giving Esther a read before beginning might benefit all of us. Esther, chapter 1. It was in the days of Ahasuerus. I promise you I'm going to mispronounce that name every time it's said, plus every other name, so I'm so sorry. I don't even know if it's Esther or Esther. I'm that stupid, so we're just gonna go ahead with all the names. That Ahasuerus, who was reigning over 127 provinces from India unto Kush. Wow. In those days, when the king Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in the castle of Susa, he gave a banquet in the 3rd year of his reign for all his chief officials and courtiers, the retinue of Persia and Media, the highborn, and the chiefs of the provinces who were before him, when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the esteem and beauty of his greatness for many days. 180 days. Man, that is something straight out of Game of Thrones. If you ever wonder where George R.R. Martin got it from, ladies and gentlemen, it is God. And when these days were fulfilled, the king gave a 7-day banquet in the court of the king's garden pavilion for all the people found in the castle of Susa, from the greatest unto the smallest. Awnings of pale cotton and blue wool were held with cord lines of fine linen and purple material on silver ring bands and marble columns. There were couches of gold and silver on a pavement of porphyry. I don't even know what that is. Marble, mother of pearl, and black marble. Someone tell me what this is. Porphyry. Drinks were served in gold vessels, some vessels being diverse from other vessels, and the royal wine was abundant, according to the means of the king. Yet drinking was according to this edict. There was to be no bother, for the king had made this deliberation to every wine steward of his household to serve according to each man's approval. Queen Vashti, too, gave a banquet for the women at the royal house of King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the king's heart was cheerful with wine, he ordered Mehuman, Bisla, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zithar, Garcus, the 7 eunuchs, ministering in the presence of King Ahasuerus. Man, I love that God just lists all of them. He knows all of them intimately, probably more intimately than they know themselves. To bring Queen Vashti before the king with the royal diadem to show off her loveliness to the peoples and the chief officials, for she was good looking in appearance. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's order that was conveyed by means of the eunuchs. The king was exceedingly wrathful, and his fury blazed up in him. So the king asked the wise men who had knowledge of precedents, for this was the royal practice before all those having knowledge of edict and adjudication. The ones next to him were Karshena, Ethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan. This is unreal. 7 chief officials of Persia and Media. We're just getting this beautiful insight into the king of Persia and Media. This is amazing. Who were seeing the royal presence and were sitting first in the kingdom. And who knows better than God? You know, Game of Thrones is fiction. This is incredible. I'm already. Oh my God, he's setting a scene, setting a beautiful scene. He asked, according to the edict, what should be done to Queen Vashti because she did not obey King Ahasuerus' order by means of the eunuchs. It's the conflict. Memucan then replied before the king and the chief officials, it was not the king himself alone whom Queen Vashti has degraded, but all chief officials and all peoples in all provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the affair of the queen shall go forth to all the wives, and cause them to despise their spouses in their own eyes, when they say that King Ahasuerus himself ordered to bring Queen Vashti before him, but she did not come. So this very day, the chief ladies of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's affair shall cite it to all the king's chief officials, and there will be an infestation of contempt and wrath. Wow. I love that I'm reading this right now. Holy crap, this is incredible. I've never read this before. If it seems good to the king, a royal decree may go forth from before him, and it may be written into the edicts of Persia and Media, so that it cannot be revoked, that Vashti must never again enter into the presence of King Ahasuerus, and that the king shall bestow her royal position upon an associate of hers who is better than she. And the king's rescript that he must execute is announced in all his kingdom, vast as it is. Then all wives shall render esteem to their spouses from the greatest unto the smallest. So I'm getting, he's saying this esteem. I mean, thinking about it in the Greek, that glory is esteem. So the wives are going to glorify all the men. Let me read this one more time so that I understand what's happening here. Because this is so thick and dense, and this is the first time I've ever reading this. If it seems good to the king, a royal decree may go forth from before him, and it may be written into the edicts of Persia and Media, so that it cannot be revoked, that Vashti must never again enter into the presence of King Ahasuerus, and that the king shall bestow her royal position upon an associate of hers who is better than she. Oh, so because the king was rejected, he's going to literally find someone that she knows who's also pretty and then like portray her as though she's better. Oh my god. Oh, this is gonna be bad. Oh, when the king's rescript that he must execute is announced in all his kingdom, vast as it is, then all wives shall render esteem to their spouses, from the greatest unto the smallest. Hmm. And the goal is for all the men to be glorified. I wonder what the wives thought of that. The proposal was good in the eyes of the king and the chief officials, of course. Yeah, no kidding. And the king did according to Memucan's proposal. He sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each province in its own provincial writing, and to each people in its own popular tongue. Wow. So they were coordinated, man. So that every man should be in control of his household and speak the tongue of his own people. After these things, when King Ahasuerus' fury had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done, and that a severance decree was issued against her. So the king's retainers who were ministering to him, said, "Let them seek out maidens for the king, virgins, good looking in appearance. May the king look after supervisors in all provinces of his kingdom, and let them convene every maiden virgin, good looking in appearance, at the castle of Susa, at the house of women under the hand of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women, and let them be provided with their beauty treatments. Then let the maiden who is well pleasing in the king's eyes be queen instead of Vashti." Oh, so he's just finding every, and that every is emphatic. Every maiden virgin. Hmm. So that makes sense. So they're going to doll him up, make him look cute. There was in the castle of Susa a Jewish man. Of course there is, because I love this. Oh my God, God's hand is in this whole story. God's hand is in this whole story. I have not heard him speak, the way that he does in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. He hasn't like said, and Yahweh said, like his prophet isn't present. But this Jewish guy's here. His name was Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite man. That's the same tribe as Paul. He was the tribe of Benjamin, whose family had been carried away from Jerusalem with the deportation that had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had deported. And that's where we see just so thick, God is present. God is present in every word. Because he said that he caused that. And Mordecai had become foster father to Hadassah, that is Esther. This is Esther. And Mordecai had become foster father to Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had no father or mother. The maiden had a lovely shape and was good looking in appearance. God knows how to make a pretty lady. At the death of her father and her mother, Mordecai took her to himself as a daughter. Now it came to be when the king's decree and his edict was announced, and when many maidens were brought together at the castle of Susa under the hand of Haggai, then Esther was also taken to the king's house under the hand of Haggai, who was in charge of the women. This maiden virgin, Esther. What was her name? What was her other name? Hadassah. I see why they renamed the book Esther. I'm kidding. I don't know what that name means. You know what? We're gonna take a quick break here. Hadassah. Let's see. Here it's in chapter 2. What chapter was it? The verse 7. Hadassah.
Strong's H 1919. Hadassah. Hadassah.
Hadassah. Okay, cool. Myrtle. Myrtle. What does that mean? What is a myrtle? An evergreen shrub which has glossy aromatic foliage, white flowers, followed by purple-black oval berries. Oh, never mind. I see why he would name her that. Because she's a maiden virgin and she's beautiful. Okay. Nice. And when it came to be, when the king's decree and his edict was announced, and when many maidens were brought together at the castle of Susa under the hand of Haggai, then Esther was also taken to the king's house. Oh, yeah. Did we read this already? No, we didn't. We did. The maiden was well-pleasing in his eyes, and she obtained kindness before him, so that he speeded up her beauty treatments and her assigned rations, and he provided her with the 7 selected maidens, assigned to her from the king's house. Then he let her and her maidens occupy the best quarters in the house of the women. Esther had not told about her people or her kindred, for Mordecai had enjoined on her that she should not tell. Yeah, it feels like that would be a good thing, because right now the Jewish people are in exile, disbanded, and probably reviled. Every day, Mordecai was walking about before the court of the house of the women, so as to know of Esther's well-being and what was being done with her. When a maiden's turn was attained, and the maiden had to come to King Ahasuerus at the end of the woman's 12 months regimen prescribed for her, since in this way the days of her beauty treatments were fulfilled, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with aromatics and with beauty treatments of the women. When after this the maiden was coming to the king, Then anything she asked for was given to her to come with her from the house of the women to the king's house. She would be entering in the evening, and she would be returning in the morning to the second house of the women, under the hand of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch. Man, this man has a lot of eunuchs. The guardian of the concubines. Concubines? Wait a minute. Are we saying what I think we're talking about? I see. Oh, because yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, it's the Medo-Persian Empire in the middle of like what, 600 BC-ish? I don't know. Somewhere around there, maybe. Maybe a little later. Maybe a little earlier. I could just be totally off. Maybe I'm stupid. If anyone can correct me, please. She would not come again to the king unless the king had taken delight in her, and when she had been called by name. When the turn was attained for Esther, whom Mordecai had taken to himself as a daughter, she was the daughter of his uncle Abihail, uh, to come to the king, she did not request permission for anything to save what Haggai, the king's eunuch, the guardian of the women, had advised. Esther had been obtaining favor in the eyes of all those seeing her. So when Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus at his royal house in the 10th month, that is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all the other women. Excuse me. She obtained more favor and kindness before him than all the other virgins, so that he placed the royal diadem on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. I had a feeling we were going to take this route. Then the king gave a great banquet for all his chief officials and his courtiers, the banquet of Esther. And he granted a rest day for the provinces and distributed helpings according to the means of the king. When diverse virgins were brought together, Mordecai was sitting in the king's gateway. Esther was not telling about her kindred or her people, just as Mordecai had enjoined on her. Yeah. I feel like I'm way off on 600 BC. I must be. For Esther was obeying Mordecai's order just as before when she had been a foster child under his care. Now I've got to look this up. When does Esther take place? I don't need an exact date. Generally take place. Let's be broad with it. Not that this is fact. This is totally speculative. So don't take this as fact. Around 400. Oh, wow. So I wasn't that far off. Okay. For like 50 to 500-ish BC. If we had to take a rough guess. Okay. When diverse virgins were brought together, Mordecai was sitting in the king's gateway. Esther was not telling about her kindred or her people, just as Mordecai had enjoined on her, for Esther was obeying Mordecai's order, just as before when she had been a foster child under his care. I feel like this is a type of Mordecai and Esther being a type of God in Israel. Or could it also be a type of the body of Christ being raised to the right hand of the king? I don't know. I don't know if that fits. I don't know. I'd have to like really study this out. This is still fascinating. Like wow, what a great story. I'm glad that this is in the middle of the Bible. Um, that's really cool. In those days, when Mordecai was sitting in the king's gateway, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs of the guardians of the threshold, were wrathful and sought out to lay hand on King Ahasuerus. Yet the plot became known to Mordecai, and he told it to Queen Esther. In Mordecai's name, Esther reported it to the king. When the plot was sought out and was found to be true, then the two of them were hanged on the gallows. and it was written on the scroll of the records of the days before the king. So Mordecai and Esther get really in close through this. So two of the king's eunuchs are just taken out, and I'm sure Mordecai, yeah, and she even says in Mordecai's name. I feel like this is a type of Israel. It's definitely a type of God in Israel. At the bare minimum. I don't know if it's a type of the body of Christ, but definitely a type here. Wow. That's incredible. After these things, King Ahasuerus magnified Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite. He advanced him and put his covered seat above all the other chief officials who were with him. All the king's quarters and the king's gateway were bowing down and prostrating themselves before Haman, for so were the instructions the king had given concerning him. As for Mordecai, he did neither bow down nor prostrate himself. So the king's quarters and the king's gateway said to Mordecai, "For what reason are you trespassing the king's instruction?" Then it came to be, when they had spoken to him day after day, and he had not hearkened to them, that they told Haman in order to see whether Mordecai's affairs would persist, for he had professed to them that he was a Jew. Mm, that's heavy. The secret's out. When Haman saw that Mordecai was not bowing down nor prostrating himself before him, Haman was filled with fury. Yeah, he probably was very anti Semitic, but it was despicable in his eyes to lay a hand on Mordecai alone, for they had told him about Mordecai's people. Yeah, wow. It was despicable in his eyes to lay a hand on Mordecai alone. Yeah. So Haman sought out to exterminate all the Jews, Mordecai's people, who were in the entire kingdom of Ahasuerus. This casual genocide. Hmm. Not that God's averse to, or not averse to genocide. He enacts that quite often. I'm looking at you, Amalekites. I believe it was the Amalekites. Uh, in the first month, that is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of the king Ahasuerus, someone cast pur, that is the lot, before Haman from day to day and from month to month, to the 12th, that is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people dispersed and parted among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their edicts are diverse from many other people. They are not obeying the king's edicts. For the king, it is not, and for the king, it is not appropriate to tolerate them. If it seems good to the king, it may be written to destroy them. And for the hands, whoa, hold on. Again, I need to make sure that I'm catching this, because this is, there is a certain people dispersed and parted among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. And their edicts are diverse from any other people, the Jews. They are not obeying the king's edicts, and for the king it is not appropriate to tolerate them. If it seems good to the king, it may be written to destroy them. And for the hands of those doing the work, I shall weigh out 10,000 silver talents to bring to the king's storerooms." Wow. So the king withdrew his ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the foe of the Jews. The king said to Haman, "The silver be given to you, also the people, to do with them according to what is well pleasing in your eyes." Then the king's scribes were called in the first month, on the 13th day of it. According to all the instructions that Haman had given, it was written to the king's satraps, to the viceroys who were over the different provinces, and to the chief officials of the different peoples, to each province as or in its own provincial writing, yeah, and to each people in its own popular tongue. It was written in the name of King Ahasuerus and was sealed with the king's ring. Hmm. Letters were sent by means of couriers to all the king's provinces to exterminate, to kill, and to destroy all the Jews from youth until old age, both the little ones and women, on a single day, the 13th of the 12th month, that is, the month of Adar, and to plunder the loot of them. A transcript of the written text was to be promulgated as an edict in all the different provinces and was to be revealed to all the peoples, namely, to become equipped for this day. The quarters rode forth post haste by order of the king. And the edict was promulgated in the castle of Susa. Then the king and Haman sat down to drink, but Susa city was doleful. They were doleful. What is doleful? I've never heard that word. Oh, sorrowful. Yeah. See. When Mordecai got knowledge of everything that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on a sackcloth and ashes. Then he went forth into the midst of the city and cried out with a loud and bitter outcry until he came before the king's gateway. For no one was to come into the king's gateway in clothing of sackcloth. Also, in every place of the different provinces to which the king's order and his edict were attaining, there was a great mourning among the Jews. Wow, guys, this has been happening in the Jewish community for kind of a long time. Really kept down under the thumb of major societies. And oftentimes, honestly, when they were in power, they did some pretty um, terrible war crimes. Um, well, really, and yeah, I'm. It's just this is like a real life Game of Thrones, on a much larger scale than a man could write. You know, it's so intense. This war of the nations, this story of the nations over the past thousands of years. It's beautiful, beautiful story. And then the inconsistencies from each culture, you know, contributing from their perspectives, it just tells us so much about humans, our bloodlust, typically. Let's read this one more time. When Mordecai got knowledge of everything that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put sackcloth and ashes. Put on sackcloth and ashes. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's just so many. Like, I'm sure that the Jewish community, like, they're just like any other like human group, human culture. You know, they really are. They're just normal people, with their own set of beliefs and thoughts about the world. It's no better or lesser than any other, really. All things considered, um, the in the modern understanding of what's happening. I'm sure that they made great friends too. Just human beings are relationship oriented. So people were probably miserable. I wonder how Esther must feel here. Like I can't wait to see if she does something about this. I mean the book is called Esther, so it's got to be somewhere where she plays in. Then Mordecai went forth into the midst of the city and cried out with a loud and bitter outcry until he came before the king's gateway. For no one was to come into the king's gateway in clothing of sackcloth. It's so rich with detail, man. Also, in every place of the different provinces to which the king's order and his edict were attaining, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and lamentation and wailing. Sackcloth and ashes became a birth for many. When Esther's maidens and her eunuchs came and told her Then was the queen in intense mental travail. And she sent clothes for Mordecai to put on and to take off his sackcloth from him, but he would not receive them. Then Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, whom he had assigned to officiate before her, and she gave him instructions about Mordecai to get knowledge that what this meant and what this was all about. So Hathach went forth to Mordecai into the city square that was before the king's gateway. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and also about the exact amount of silver that Haman had promised to weigh out the king's storerooms against the Jews to destroy them. He also gave him a transcript of the written text of the edict that had been issued in Susa to have them exterminated. He told him to show it to Esther and to tell her and to enjoin her to come into the king and supplicate to him and appeal earnestly before him on behalf of her people. Man, Assassin's Creed has nothing on this. Holy crap. Man. We're so alone, man. So few people know this story. I know that not many people know this anymore. When Hathach came back and told Esther Mordecai's words, I can't quite say that actually. Not the story, but just the beauty of the story. I know that so few people we get to look at this in the concordant version. You know, we get to see this with generally like a far more accurate translation than most. I'm not calling it perfect, but I'd say the concordant is probably like 90% accurate. Which is so much more than anything. All the little notations, they're making notes, and there's a reason that there's such rich diction here. It's because they're showing all of the careful nuance of the Greek and the Hebrew here. It's just so beautiful. And it feels like George R.R. Martin like just had to draw from this to tell his stories of the Lannisters and the Starks. I'm reading the Game of Thrones book, so while I'm I didn't know that this was going to be as immersive as it is for me. This is really beautiful. Oh, Sean Eagle knows. Yeah, Sean Eagle probably knows so much more. He's the one that told us about Proverbs. You know, Proverbs 8 and the pre-existence thing. Gabe, do you wanna continue the story? Have you read this before? We're just gonna sit here and wait awkwardly for Gabe's answer. It's okay. I should find the Jeopardy music while we wait, though. Well, come on in, brother. I'm gonna put a link here. You haven't read. Good. I haven't read either. I can't stay up too much longer. I think I've got till like 3:30 and then I've really got to go to sleep or else I'm gonna suck ass at work tomorrow. But um I'm so sorry. I know if there's any like hardcore religious person reading this, I, I say cuss words sometimes. I know. Um it's uh right here. Hey Gabe.
Hey, I won't have insight to share. I'll just be like your little hangout buddy in the side. I can chime in.
That's okay. I'll keep going,
Yeah.
but this is so beautiful. I've never read this before. This is absolutely beautiful.
I'm sorry I missed the full context, but yeah, I think I can pick it up as you go along if you keep reading.
It's so for the context, the brief context, I'm not really keeping track of the chapters and numbers right now. I'm kind of intentionally ignoring it, so I'm sorry if I can't like cite verses right now. I'm trying to just be immersed in the story. Um, so there's this King Ahasuerus, and I'm like 60% sure that's how you say his name. Uh, he rules the Medo-Persian Empire. and all of his king's eunuchs, he finds a woman. Her name is Vashti, and he's like, I want this lady. I
Hmm.
think that um, she is the most beautiful creature I've ever seen, and so he issues a decree that she has to come to him. She has to stand before him, but she doesn't take the bait, and she just doesn't go near him. And so he issues a decree that she is to be exiled from the king's presence henceforth, can never be seen again, and from any of the provinces in the Medo-Persian Empire. Bye, gone forever. Um, and so he then says, okay, now we're going to essentially get a bunch of concubines. All of these women, we're going to get as many maiden virgins as we can, and just draw them in here. And I know that that was a hyperbolic statement for anyone who's been watching longer than Gabe. So Gabe, if you want to go back and reread it, go ahead. I'm just being hyperbolic. I'm not being truest to fact. I'm just generalizing, but he essentially said all these maiden virgins, they have to come to me, and so the they dressed up all these maiden virgins in their makeup and started presenting them. And among these maiden virgins is this girl Esther, and of course it's Esther, and she's the most beautiful of them all. It's like a Snow White thing. So they speed up her beauty process, and they send her right up to the king as soon as they can, among like 6 or 7 other women, or I think 6 other women, so it's 7 total.
The
And
glow
so
up.
yes, the glow up, that's exactly what it is. And so the king, of course, chooses Esther. Esther is a Jew among the amidst the Babylonian exile.
Hmm.
So she is intentionally and purposefully not telling the king what her ancestry is,
Okay.
and is purposefully not doing that because it would shame him, I think, is the context I'm gathering, but I can't say that for certain. So the king uh, marries Esther. Um, they and in the meantime, like afterwards, the king raises up this guy named Haman, and this guy Haman is not a happy camper. He is very how to say, anti-Semitic. He gets mad
Hmm.
that Mordecai isn't essentially venerating him, and says, "Okay, I'm going to say that you are not listening to the king's decree," because the king had raised up this guy Haman in his uh, uh, infantry, or among his military, and was like, "Okay, you're going to be worshipped by the people." When you walk by, be super kind to him, worship him as if you were a god, bow to him, all that stuff. Well, Mordecai didn't take any of that nonsense. And so Haman got very upset, and a couple of people said, "Hey, that guy's a Jew." So Mordecai's secret was out.
Hmm. Okay.
Mordecai is the um, how to say, the foster father, is how the concordant puts it, to Esther. Apparently, her uncle and his sister-in-law passed away.
So we have
So
this like George Martin Game of Thrones situation going on, War of the Roses, with
it
all these like
literally
families.
is.
Yeah, yeah. And
It
so
literally is.
then all of a sudden there's this thing that goes in like this from the outside of spirituality through Mordecai being connected to Esther that like ruins their whole game somehow.
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure that Mordecai is a type of God and Esther is a type of Israel, as is the natural type. So there's some foreshadowing here. I think Mordecai is um, good in the eyes of King Ahasuerus because a plot to overthrow the king was made known to Mordecai, and Mordecai informed Queen Esther because now she's the queen of Medo Persia because God's God. And Esther, of course, reports it in Mordecai's name. So I think this is a type of faithful Israel surviving and thriving in Medo Persia. And that's a type. I think I'm getting more confident. I don't know if it's a type of the body of Christ. I can't say that with confidence, but I can see Israel prophetically restoring the nations.
Well, yeah, I can see it. If like say Christ as the Mashiach is stealing into this king rule, like these things that are just of men, of kings, he becomes the Mashiach, but he is of
Yeah,
the celestial. So he's like stealing into to a fleshly role, but he's actually of the
yeah.
celestial.
I'll also add, I haven't seen God's name mentioned. As in Elohim, it doesn't matter. Elohim, Eloah, El, Yahweh, Yeshua, whatever the fuck. I have not
Mhm.
seen a single use of God's name. That is insane to me. But he's so prominent in the story, regardless. Because we know the Jews are his chosen people, and he doesn't need to constantly lay that on. He does through his prophets and what they say, but that's not what's happening here. What's happening here is he just kind of like steps back and kind of demonstrates it and says, "Watch this,"
Mhm.
and you know he's orchestrating the event.
Yeah, because these events actually are what create George Martin's, Game of Thrones or any of this. Like it's all based
Yeah.
on this. Like this is actually the bedrock of that, right?
Yeah. That I mean, that's exactly what I've been saying. I've been looking at it, and I'm like, this is just such a larger scale. We're talking about the Medo-Persian Empire, and this is the second world empire that Esther has just been made a queen of. The world empire, it's incredible. And I'm looking at they say this every time the king issues a decree, God makes sure to tell you the massive size of the kingdom, and he says it in such declaratory fashion, and it's just so rich with
of
it.
certainty.
Yeah, in every place of the different provinces to which the king's order and edict were attaining. That's how he talked. That's how he talks. That's how he writes.
I mean, it makes sense that if you're dealing with like the realms of men, all these like the kings and like the order of kings and stuff, when the Jews were in captivity in Babylon, it makes sense that that's where the story plays out, and that you don't have to mention Yahweh or El or Jesus or anything. It's all just on the realm of men. And now the interlopers coming in with this mysticism or spirituality to them,
Yeah,
like getting crossbred with this earthly, these kingdoms, these empires.
yeah.
Sorry, I'm sorry, I'm just rambling. Just keep
No, this
reading.
is I mean, it's just incredible. Like this is a beautiful story. I'm and now like you walked in on the moment where we see Esther's reaction to what's happening here,
Hmm.
because Haman went up to the king and said, "Hey, there's a certain fraction of people out there that aren't exactly following your decrees to worship me. So is it okay if I like destroy them?" And the king's like, "Yeah, sure." So
Uh-huh.
uh, anti-Semitism was just kind of excused there. I'm not confident that King Ahasuerus knows that this is like a national pinpointed attack, Assassin's Creed style, I guess.
Mhm.
I think that he is unaware. And so now that I'm seeing Esther, I don't exactly know the context. I just have to like keep going and see. And maybe I'll read it even a second time on my own and see what I can learn. But
Yeah.
after this, I'm going to be reading the second article in the Book of Esther series by Vladimir Gelesnoff. So it's not going to. There's like this, and then there's the compliment, the little treat at the end with Mr. VG.
Yeah. We love Vlad. But anyway, keep reading. I just want, like I said, I just want to hang out like in the side here and just keep reading.
Oh, I gotcha. All right, let me get it on. When Esther's maidens and her eunuchs came and told her, then was the queen in intense mental travail. Then she sent clothes for Mordecai to put on and to take off his sackcloth from him, but he would not receive them. Then Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs whom he had assigned to officiate before her, and she gave him instructions about Mordecai to get knowledge of what this meant and what this was all about. So Hathach went forth to Mordecai into the city square that was before the king's gateway. Then Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and also about the exact amount of silver that Haman had promised to weigh out for the king's storerooms against the Jews to destroy them. He also gave him a transcript of the written text of the edict that had been issued in Susa to have them exterminated. He told him to show it to Esther, and to tell her and to enjoin on her to come in to the king and supplicate to him and appeal earnestly before him on behalf of her people. When Hathach came back and told Esther Mordecai's words, then Esther replied to Hathach and gave him instructions for Mordecai. All the king's quarters and the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman coming into the king, into the inner court, who was not called, his only edict is to be put to death. Aside from the one to whom the king might hold out the golden scepter, he will stay alive. As for me, I have not been called to come into the king for these past 30 days. Okay, what does that mean? Let me make sure that I'm understanding
So
this.
I was saying, I'm sorry, I thought I was on mute there, but I see something there with the temple of the Jews. Like, you know, you can't get to the inner sanctum of the temple unless you're special. So like Esther is getting up to the king, just like the Jews are approaching God Almighty with the sacrifices, like to the Ark of the Covenant, you know.
Yeah, I
So
kind of find it
there's like
interesting that
parallels.
it's not around.
Mhm.
I think that's a beautiful contrast, actually, because right now the ark is not around. The temple's destroyed, so they don't even have a way to establish a tent of appointment with their God.
Right. So the inner sanctum of the king, which you would be destroyed, right? If you go up to the king and he could kill you. It said it right there. Where was it?
Mm,
His only edict is to put to death.
yeah,
I mean, it's the same thing with the coming day of the Lord. Like if you are not in with God,
yeah,
like if you
yeah.
don't understand the Christ, you when the day of the Lord, same thing. It's like the holiness is
Wow,
too holy. You're gonna get struck down unless you're
fascinating.
already part of Him. Yeah.
What does she mean at the end here? As for me, I have not been called to come into the king for these past 30 days. So is she saying that uh she just hasn't gone into the king's inner court for the past 30 days?
Yeah, that's a weird one. I don't know.
Well, I don't want to waste time, so I'll press on, but that's
Okay.
an interesting one. That throws me off a bit. I wonder if what's his name, Mr. Gelesnoff, has anything on that. Hathach told Mordecai Esther's words. Then Mordecai said to reply to Esther, Do not imagine in your own soul that in the king's house you will escape any more than all the other Jews. Yeah. For if you keep silence in this crisis, sustentation and rescue shall stand up for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house, you shall perish. And who is there knowing whether it was for a crisis like this that you have attained to the royal position? I like that. That's beautiful.
Also, like the sustenance and like you shall perish if you don't have that. I mean, it smacks of the same thing
Yeah.
as the what we were just talking about.
Yeah.
A
Man.
royal position. If you have the royal
Yeah.
position, you don't have to worry about that.
It was for a crisis like this.
hmm It's just so it's incredible, like how God plays out everything through these, you know,
Patterns.
old-fashioned stories about kings and you know, just like it's like a fantasy story, but it still it holds all the details of what's really going to happen in the future.
And it's just the scary part is that it's real. These are
And
real people. This isn't fiction. This is Game of Thrones in real life.
yes, yeah, I thought about that earlier today. Like, you know, Lord of the Rings, you read that, you wish, like, I wish I lived in Middle Earth, you know? Well, you could tell people that believe in that, yeah, actually, real life is just like Middle Earth, or what's I don't, I forget, was it Westeros from
Pretty
Game of
freaking
Thrones?
magical. Yeah. Yeah,
It's
Westeros.
real. Yeah, it's actually real. Like the world that you live in is just as mythological. Just you can delve through scrolls like Gandalf in the the bottom of Minas
Yeah.
Tirith or whatever. You know, it's exactly
Yeah.
that real.
And it's beautiful because unlike many other authors who will um, give you a limited perspective, God gives you his perspective. And
Mhm.
the beauty of that is that it's God. He's going to be right.
Yeah, yeah. That's the good thing that we know that the end of the fantasy story that we live in is actually very hopeful.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So, yeah, Esther said to reply to Mordecai, go, collect together all the Jews who are to be found in Susa, and fast on my behalf. Do not eat and do not drink for 3 days, night and day. I too with my maidens shall fast likewise. In this way I shall come in to the king, even though it is not according to the edict. And if I should perish, I shall perish. And Mordecai passed along, and did all just as Esther had enjoined on him. It was on the third day that Esther put on royal clothing and took her stand in the inner court of the king's house, over against the royal house, while the king was sitting on his royal throne in the royal house, over against the portal of the house. It came to be, as the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his eyes, and the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the top of the scepter. What a beautiful image. Then the king said to her, what have you to say, Queen Esther? Holy crap. What a beautiful shot.
so she did something she was not supposed to do against the
Yeah.
edict that was declared.
Yeah.
But yet she was justified because of the eyes of the king towards her. It's almost, I could be going off the rails here, but this is
Or in
like
the
the body of
prophets through
Christ.
the Holy Scriptures. Yeah. Promised
Yeah,
before through the prophets in the Holy Scriptures. That's what this is. This is a type of the body of Christ. Oh wow. Beautiful. Okay, we found the type. I was saying earlier, like I know it's a type of Israel for sure, but like where's the Christ part of it? And you just kind of like completed the thought there. That's perfect.
awesome. Yeah, we're dressing up in our clothes. We're not paying attention to the law or the edict, and
Yeah, yeah,
God's
you're
and God
ignoring the edict.
right, and God sees us because we are ordained to be what we are.
and we are able to touch the top of his scepter.
Mm-hmm.
That's not innuendo.
No.
God's not like using that as a figure of anthropomorphism. I promise, guys. Come on.
No.
Then the king said to her, "What have you to say, Queen Esther? What is your urgent appeal? Even unto half of the kingship it shall be granted to you." Esther replied, "If it seems good to the king, let the king come today with Haman to the banquet that I have prepared for him." The king commanded, "Bring Haman quickly to act at the word of Esther." So the king came with Haman to the banquet that Esther had prepared. Oh, what's about to happen? This is some red wedding stuff, isn't it? At the wine feast, the king said to Esther, "What is your request? Shall be granted to you. What is your urgent appeal? And to have the kingship, it shall be granted to you." Esther answered and said, "My request and my urgent appeal is, if I have found favor in the king's eyes, and if it seems good to the king, to grant my request, and to attend to my urgent appeal. Let the king come tomorrow with Haman to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and tomorrow I shall comply with the word of the king." On that day Haman went forth rejoicing and cheerful of heart. When Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gateway, that he did not rise and did not even stir because of him, then Haman was filled with fury against Mordecai. Yet Haman checked himself and came to his house. He sent a word and let his male friends and his wife Zeresh come. Haman related to them the glory of his riches, his many sons, and all about how the king had magnified him and how he had advanced him above all the king's chief officials and courtiers. Haman added, "Indeed, Queen Esther let no one save me come with the king to the banquet that she gave. And also tomorrow I am invited to come to her with the king. But all of this, it is no compensation for me every time I see Mordecai the Jew sitting in the king's gateway." So his wife Zeresh, with all his male friends, advised him, "Let them build a lofty gallows of 50 cubits, and in the morning ask the king that they should hang Mordecai on it. Then set out with the king to the banquet rejoicing." Plan seemed good before Haman, and he had the gallows built. Oh man. During that night, sleep flitted away from the king, and he said to bring the memorial scroll of records of the days, and they were read before the king. Did you have something to say? I know you unmuted your mic.
Oh, no, I was just saying, like, I really enjoy how you're reading this. Like, people think the Old Testament, like, especially written correctly, is, like, hard to read. But when you're reading it, it's just like a bedtime story. It sounds just perfectly easy to understand. So continue, please.
Oh, it's so fun, man. You should see the story in Genesis. I've been going through them on the concordant literal, like Old Testament readings. Those
Mhm.
like 3-hour behemoths. They're actually pretty good. I think the only one I've not really enjoyed is Numbers chapter 7. That chapter is so annoying. Other than that, the entire everything's 10 out of 10. I've really loved it. And even number 7, I understand its value to God. And so I love it on that principle alone. So but alone, I stress. I really like. I never want to like have to sit there and read that again.
Your own
Like
personal hell will be reading number 7
yeah,
forever.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's like torture porn. Honestly, I'm
Yeah.
kidding. No, it's not that bad. But it's no, but it's no. It just wasn't that fun. It's just
Uh,
dry, very dry, and repetitive.
yeah. Yeah. Anyway, the way you read it, it's just nice because it's not really that difficult. Like these are plain statements. So anyway, I'm enjoying. That's all I was saying. So continue, please, brother.
Yeah, man, this is fun. Yeah, during that night, sleep flitted away from the king, and he said to bring the memorial scroll of records of the days. And they were read before the king. There it was found written that Mordecai had denounced Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, of the guardians of the threshold, who had sought to lay hand on King Ahasuerus. The king asked, "What esteem and greatness has been conferred on Mordecai for this?" The king's retainers, who were ministering to him, answered, "Nothing was conferred on him." Then the king asked, "Who's in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the court outside the king's house to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai. Oh my god. Oh my god. This is about to
It's like a
explode.
Coen Brothers movie.
It is. It's exactly. It's like shoot, just the greatest poetic and dramatic irony I think I could ever read. This is far and beyond Shakespeare.
Mm-hmm.
What a beautiful poetic irony that God does this. He does it in my life every day. I cannot escape it. I don't get a fucking break from it, honestly. And to see it, I mean, he's not really changed that pattern. He keeps doing it.
People think it's a tragedy. It's a comedy.
It's a comedy. I've never forgotten that you say that. That's what I was thinking too. The First Kings 18 thing.
Mhm.
That's so funny. Okay, yeah, so he was talking to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. Hey, this guy was so confident. The king's retainers replied to him, "Here is Haman standing in the court." So the king commanded, "Let him enter." When Haman came in, the king asked him, "What ought to be done for the man in whose esteem the king has taken a delight?" Now Haman said in his heart, "To whom but me would the king desire to confer superlative esteem?" This word esteem is glory in Greek. In Greek, it's just glory. And in the Greek text, if you look at the sublinear, you can see it's just esteem.
Okay.
Yeah, so Haman said to the king, "For the man in whose esteem the king has taken a delight, let them bring out royal clothing with which the king has clothed himself, and a horse on which the king has ridden, with the royal diadem that has been placed on its head. Then may the clothing and horse be put at the hand of one of the king's high-born chief officials, and let him clothe the man in whose esteem the king has taken a delight, and parade him on the horse in the city square, while proclaiming before him, thus is it done to the man in whose esteem the king has taken a delight."
This sounds like Canterbury Tales. Have you ever read that? The story of the two knights fighting?
I have not read that. That's actually on my list, though. It's funny you mentioned that.
There's a great
I
story in
have the
there.
book.
Yeah. It's just about the buildup of these two guys that are supposed to fight. And it just describes all the like the grandeur of their armaments or their cloaks or
Yeah,
everything. They get to
and
fight
I
and it's
love
like
that.
a big it's just a big nothing. It's like a big shit show. So it
That's what it feels like. It feels like this is.
mhm.
I mean, he's going to like grant this, I'm sure, and then he's going to like be granted something else. It could be a pair of threes. It could be just a pair. I don't know.
Mhm.
Uh, but whatever it is, then he's gonna say, "And then let me hang Mordecai," and the king's gonna be like, "Wait, are we talking about the same Mordecai? Like Mordecai that
Right.
saved my life, Mordecai? No, no, no. What the hell?" And that's just gonna piss off Amon further.
Yeah,
Oh man,
it's the pomp and circumstance of it though that leads up to it. It's just like that stuff is nothing, but yet it's all described, like how
yeah,
important all these things are.
yeah. This is just beautiful. Then may the clothing and horse be put at the hand of one of the king's highborn chief officials, and let him clothe. Oh yeah, I was doing my shit douchebaggery voice for him, and let him clothe the man in whose esteem the king has taken a delight, and parade him on the horse in the city square, while proclaiming before him, "Thus is it done to the man in whose esteem the king has taken a delight." Then the king commanded him on, "Make haste and take the clothing and the horse, just as you have said. I knew it. And deal in this way with Mordecai the Jew, who is sitting in the king's gateway. You must not omit anything of all that you have spoken." Oh, wow. He said, "I can't remember all that." Yeah,
I don't give a shit about that.
yeah, man, do whatever. So Haman took the clothing and the horse, clothed Mordecai, and paraded him in the city square while he proclaimed before him, "Thus it is done to the man in whose esteem the king has taken a delight." Then Mordecai returned to the king's gateway. Oh, wait a minute. I missed the context. Oh, wow. So I'm way off. Oh, I missed the context. So he's not saying he wants to actually I thought he was talking about man in whose esteem about himself. That is entirely my fault. The man in whose esteem is Mordecai.
Well, I
From
missed the
the context.
context that you're thinking of. I'm not even reading into that deep. I'm just like, you know, out here
This
on the
is
stage.
so what's happening? The king asked who is in the court. Yada 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 yada. It's somewhere here. Uh,
What's your assumption?
I don't want to assume. That's why I'm looking and confirming
Well,
that I am
yeah.
remembering what I said, what it
What
was.
was your assumption? I guess I would want to ask.
Um, that as oh my gosh. Uh, my assumption was that Haman was the man in whose esteem the king has taken a delight. I thought he was talking about himself, but the man in whose esteem. Oh, here it is. It's at the beginning of the 6th chapter. Okay, yeah, I was going too far back. Mordecai had denounced Bigthana and Teresh. What esteem and greatness has been conferred on Mordecai for this? So it's the same word. It's God's got that diction down. So it's that esteem, and I can tell now because he parades Mordecai around, not himself. He clothed Mordecai, paraded him in the city square, while he proclaimed before him, "Thus it is done to the man in whose esteem the king has taken a delight." So it's about Haman clothing Mordecai, which kind of obscures to me what Haman's doing. As for Haman, he went post haste to his house, mournful with hooded head. Oh
Uh,
wait, man, I lost it here for a second. I lost the plot. Hang on. What do
I'm
you
still
what can you
I'm
correct
still
me?
catching.
What's going on?
I'm catching up with the plot because I thought Haman was somebody that protected Esther and Mordecai, and for some reason
Yeah.
Mordecai, because Esther protects Mordecai, now Haman is putting something on to Mordecai under Esther.
So Haman is the one of the main men of the King's Guard. If I can find the verse once more, uh he was kind
He,
of it's funny the way he's presented in the story. He just kind of gets interrupted. He kind of just kicks off an interruption from the story because for the first 2 chapters it covers Queen Vashti, the Queen Esther, like I was describing, and then chapter 3 just kind of like interrupts the plot to introduce this guy. Mr. Inserts himself into the plot. Haman,
it,
son of Hammedatha the Agagite. So King Ahasuerus advances him and puts him above every other chief official. So all the king's quarters and the king's gateway were bowing down and prostrating themselves before Haman. Haman was supposed to protect the uh, concubines, I believe.
so he's
Uh,
like the head knight. Like if we look medieval towards it, like
yeah, very similar. So he's very, very high up in the king's military, essentially, and probably his chief of like political staff as well. So this is a very, very powerful man. So Haman was talking about himself. Oh, He was talking about himself.
And
So
Haman's,
Mordecai's
I
great.
forget Haman's relationship with Esther. Like Haman knows Esther because
Oh, she's just the queen. So I don't know. They haven't really connected in the plot so far. It just seems
okay,
like she knows that he destroyed the Jews. Haman's problem is with Mordecai. It's not really with Esther, honestly.
okay.
As far as I can tell, I mean, he just wants to get back at him by killing all the Jews, but I don't think he has a personal like attachment to this other than being pissed off with this one, and he just made an assumption about the entire race, I guess, and said it's
Right,
time to
but
end.
there's a protection on the Jews because of Esther being in with the actual king, and then Haman serves the king, and so too he serves Esther, and now under Esther being with the king, Mordecai is this other like third character that it, am I
Yeah, that's why I'm saying I feel like he's a type of God, and Esther usually is representative of him,
okay?
because he's her foster father, and I don't know if Haman knows that or not. Um, yeah, I don't know if Haman knows that or not.
Okay.
This will probably take a few reads, but that's why I'm excited to see some careful study from my brother. But even still, it's
No, it totally sounds like a Game of Thrones story. Like it's the king and the woman that goes in, and then she has the people that she's actually a part of that are not actually part of the group of the people the king is a part of. He has this head guy, the knight, and then they have Mordecai that she protects, who is the basically the main character in God's plot, right? Would be Mordecai.
Mhm. Yeah.
Esther is the
In God's plot,
facilitator.
Mordecai and Esther are the characters. I mean, even this like glorification is through the woman here, and I feel like this is going to be a victory for Esther, because that's how God works, and the Christians love this book of Esther way more than all the other books of the Bible. Like they really love this book of the Bible. This is
Really?
one of
Do
those
they?
like yeah. This is one of those top tier because it barely mentions it. I still haven't seen God's name.
Well, they
It
hate
barely
God's name.
mentions his name. They don't believe in God. What they're seeing here is a big free will story.
Okay. So
Just in
anyway,
the
if you went
middle,
back, like, could we like
seeing
scroll
the
back just
power
a
of the
little
human
bit
will.
to read up like to the event? It sounds like the prancing around that's happening, that's about to be Mordecai being killed or not, is happening.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's for sure the core of the plot. So at least we're not losing that.
Hmm.
So even if we get a few details mixed, I think that's okay. We've got
Yeah.
the broad structure happening. But here we go. We'll go one more time. During that night, sleep flitted away from the king, and he said to bring the memorial scroll of records of the days, and they were read before the king. There it was found written that Mordecai had denounced Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs of the guardians of the threshold, who had sought to lay hand on King Ahasuerus. The king asked, "What esteem and greatness has been conferred on Mordecai for this?" The king's retainers, who were ministering to him, answered, "Nothing was conferred on him." Then the king asked, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the court outside the king's house to speak with the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. I love it. I just love it. That's one of my favorite verses so far. Just in general. Just
Hmm.
what a banger of dramatic irony. That like Jane Austen has nothing on that.
Yeah, but I mean, it's almost like Joseph in Egypt, right? Who is this
Yeah.
fucker Joseph that has these wacky dreams? Like, who is
Yeah.
he to tell us anything? So
Yeah.
that's basically Mordecai. And he said, does he have any really true righteousness under our system of law here in our system?
Right.
No, he's
Right.
just this. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
No, that makes sense. Now, Haman had just entered the court outside the king's house, so to speak with the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows. I love how Mordecai is emphatic as well. Mordecai. That little apostrophe right there at the beginning of the M, that references an emphatic term.
Oh,
When it's emphasized really hard in the Hebrew, like there's an inflection on it to highlight it's supposed to pop. It's like the italics of Hebrew. Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. The king's retainers replied to him, "Here is Haman, standing in the court." So the king commanded, "Let him enter." Sorry, I need some water. This has been a long one.
yeah.
When Haman came in, the king asked him what ought to be done for the man in whose esteem the king has taken a delight. Oh, now Haman said in his heart, "To whom but me would the king desire to confer superlative esteem?"
Mm.
Oh, so he's sitting there thinking, "Oh, I'm about to be esteemed." So Haman said to the king, "For the man in whose esteem the king has taken a delight, let him bring about royal clothing." Look how necessary that one little part was. I missed the whole context because of that little part. I didn't realize that Haman thought he was talking about himself and then realizes later this is an abrupt juxtaposition. This is funny. That's what this is. This is comedy. Clothed
yeah.
Mordecai. And it's the same emphasis, the same emphatic Mordecai.
And it's law versus faith, right? Because law would be Haman, like he's just
Yeah,
ruling under the king, and then the faith is this wacky character Mordecai from nowhere, that somehow
yeah.
has esteem of the king from what? Like,
This
why
is
does he
Israel
have
being
esteem?
provoked to jealousy
Hmm.
with the body of Christ sitting at the right of God.
Right? Yeah. Who is this guy to have any esteem of the king? So anyway, yeah.
There's just so many layers to it, so many beautiful layers to this. There's just what a number of dimensions. Yeah, and this is the beautiful thing. Like this is not a long book. We're more than halfway done. We're probably 2/3 of the way done, maybe 3/4. And this is I mean, that's just incredible to me how rich and full of necessary detail this is. This is why I like the short books too, because the reason Numbers and Genesis and Deuteronomy are so long sometimes is because they have so much ground to cover, so much lineage to get through and clarify, and it's not just a eventful, action-packed romp adventure. It's a detailed history of an entire nation. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of this person beget this person beget this person, and yeah, it might drive it's certainly necessary. And the people that are begotten are going to look at their names later and be like, "Oh yeah, God was paying attention. That's nice."
Right. And if it's
And
just
that is
narrative, like total narrative, like narrative drive, like this happened, this happened, this happened, you don't really have time for the metaphor, or to get these layers that God is revealing, like the Haman guy being basically he's almost like the James gang from Galatians, right? He's
aces,
saying like,
yeah,
yeah, he's like he's saying this guy, why does he
yeah,
have the esteem of the king? He's a piece of shit, he's nobody.
yeah.
So anyway.
So yeah, that's why Haman goes here mournful with hooded head. So as for Haman, in realizing like, and then having to conduct that was probably thoroughly humiliating for him and his beautiful, precious ego. So Haman went post haste to his house, mournful with hooded head. Haman related to his wife Zeresh and to all his male friends everything that had just happened to him. His advisers and his wife Zeresh said to him, "Since Mordecai, before whom you have started to fall, is from the seed of the Jews, you shall not prevail against him. Indeed, you shall fall before him." While he was still speaking with him, the king's eunuchs attained and hustled to bring Haman to the banquet that Esther had prepared. Wow. So the king and Haman came to feast with the queen Esther. Then on the second day, during the wine feast, the king asked Esther again, "What is your request, Queen
I'm
Esther?"
sorry. I apologize because we're trying to get through this, but like I can even see that, like Esther being just the Jew in the house, or the one of God in the house, She has a
Yeah,
banquet
more.
prepared.
Yeah.
Like
And then there's
it,
this juxtaposition of you shall fall before him, and then Haman is brought to the banquet that Esther had prepared.
right, which is what God is doing with all
Yeah.
creation. Anyway, sorry, I,
And
I kind
I
of
love how the nations, they also recognize the seed of the Jews. They have they got their butts whooped over and over and over again by the by the God of the Jews. And even while the Jews are this low, many people still are afraid here. And rightly so. They still know the stories. The
yeah,
name of
that
God
that makes
is still
sense. Yeah, the
present.
history.
Yeah, he might be blasphemed, yeah, and ignored among the nations and repelled because Jews in the time of their prime and then their Second Chronicles, First Chronicles were passing children through flames, um, which isn't exactly an inviting outlook, even
It's
to
not,
some
as
of the
Trump would
other
say,
kings.
yeah, not good.
Yeah, because that was like power and then torture.
Mhm.
That was that. I mean, what many kings did was are insane and horrifying. Honestly, of the kings of old, but many of them were really just looking to run a tight ship, and would slaughter for um, a need to maintain order in a chaotic society, in a less civilized society, just in general,
Mhm.
which just called for rougher um, authority at the time. Where people just there's no cameras around a corner. Anything could happen, and nobody can prove things without the forensic detail nowadays.
Yeah, well, even these guys, like the two tribes, or even the one tribe, was it one or two, like Benjamites and the tribe of Judah? They were the ones that were in
Yeah.
captivity in this story, right? The rest, the 10 tribes, were scattered to the earth before. So even this is like a small piece of what's really happening. I mean, it is, it's in the Bible, it's in the Old Testament, it's what's happening relevant at the time. But
Mhm.
you know, God's story with Israel in general and the earth, this is just a really small part. But it is interesting to know that even these guys are kind of scared based on what they know about the God of the Jews, the one that, the Lord of the Old Testament.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, they have that in
Yeah.
mind. So,
Yeah, they're
and
they're they're paying attention. I mean, even up until Rome sacked the Second Temple, I think it was in 70 AD. That even then, that was like the first time anyone was like, "All right, we're gonna ransack these guys."
mhm,
It took them forever until they killed their own god and then deteriorated and got more violent per acts.
mhm.
And yes, shortly thereafter, destruction of the Second Temple, swift and necessary.
Oh, yeah, it's like a fractal. You see nature, everything that's happening is always happening in every single one of these stories. It's just all totally connected to the source. Anyway, so we can
Yeah.
continue. We got distracted.
Yeah, so the king and Haman came to feast with Queen Esther. Then on the second day, during the wine feast, the king asked Esther again, "What is your request, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. What is your urgent appeal? Unto half of the kingship, it shall be granted to you." Queen Esther answered and said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, O king, and if it seems good to the king, may my own soul be granted to me at my request, and my people's at my urgent appeal. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be exterminated, to be killed, to be destroyed. Now, supposing we had been sold as male slaves and as maids, I would have kept silence, for it would not be appropriate to report such distress and cause trouble to the king." The king Ahasuerus inquired. He asked Queen Esther, "Who then is he? And just where is he who has filled his heart to act this way?" Esther replied, "The man, the foe, and enemy, is this evil Haman.
Oh, that's weird. It's like, where is your king? Who is your God? That's like that's been mentioned many times in the Old Testament, right? Where is your God?
Yeah.
And so she puts it on on Haman.
Yeah.
Anyway, go on.
Tell it. Um, Destructive. As we know, evil means not sin, it's to destroy. Many things are evil, and sometimes they're necessary. Oftentimes it's necessary. But in this case, well, even in this case, the plot was still necessary for this epic that we're reading. Even this evil is necessary, if not a good thing, um, or albeit not a good thing. Haman was frightened before the king and the queen. When the king, in his fury, arose from the wine feast to go into the garden of the pavilion, Haman stayed behind to appeal earnestly for his soul from Queen Esther, for he saw that there was evil determined against him from the king. Yet the king returned from the garden of the pavilion to the house of the wine feast as Haman was falling upon the couch on which Esther was. So the king shouted, "Will he even molest the queen with me in the house?" Jesus. As the word had come forth from the king's mouth, they hooded Haman's face. And Harbona, one of the eunuchs before the king, said, "Moreover, behold, there is standing at Haman's house the lofty gallows of 50 cubits that Haman had prepared for Mordecai, who had spoken to the good of the king." So the king commanded, "Hang him on it." Wow. Then they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai, and the king's fury subsided. On the same day, King Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman, the foe of the Jews, to Queen Esther. As for Mordecai, he came before the king. Esther had told what he was to her. The king took off his ring that he had reclaimed from Haman and bestowed it on Mordecai. Then Esther appointed Mordecai to oversee Haman's house.
Holy shit, Haman. This guy is given the ring and he's overseeing his entire house. Anyway, go on.
Wow. Maybe Mordecai is the type of Christ. The king is God.
Hmm.
Mordecai is placed down low for Haman to run things. Satan
Hmm. Oh wow,
royally
that's
sees
great. Yeah.
everything. Mordecai is given the authority that we read of in the New Testament in being raised to the right of the Father, or the King in this case.
Yeah, given jurisdiction over the third eon, at least,
Yeah. And I guess we get to see it in the fatherly sense, but it's really like kingly on their end, on Israel's end, because to them, this is a practical demonstration. What a beautiful story, man. Oh my God. We're about to read also, I think, can't remember if it's, I think it's Esther 8:9, not 9:8. I think it's 8:9. It's going to be the longest verse in the Bible.
Okay. I was thinking of
So,
too. It said Haman, he like went away from Esther and like prayed that he would be, given something good. Yet it was not his place to do that. It was almost like Judas repenting, after handing over Christ or
yeah,
something. Like this is
it's
his role. It's a shitty role, but
Satan
that.
trying to screw Israel, really. This could be the judgment day of Revelation.
Mhm.
Remember the beast and the girl, the Babylonian girl, right? It's shoot. I'm way too tired for it, but
I'm
it's
sorry. Yeah.
I think it's there's the woman riding the beast, and the woman is the type of Israel.
Hmm.
Uh, and that's what this is. I'm kind of seeing it a bit. Um, so God is shouting, "Will Satan even molest the queen with me in the house,
Yeah,
and he's thrown out or
right.
put chained, I guess, in the lake of fire.
Yeah, I think Israel is no. I'm sorry. I think Jerusalem, the city, is actually that woman. She is actually Babylon. That's a whole different topic, so we won't go into it. But yeah,
Yeah. I might
I
be totally way off on that front, but I just I'm seeing a type of like why Satan trying to control Israel. I mean,
mhm.
of course, God would be angry at that, and that's kind of what I'm seeing if we're sticking with the type of Mordecai being Christ, Esther being Israel, God being God or the King here.
Yeah. Satan is either Judas or no. I'm sorry. Haman is Judas or Satan, and
Yeah,
then
very yeah.
Mordecai is Christ. The ring is actually put on his hand. It's all talk about fantasy stories. This is
Lord of the
like
Rings.
it's no, it's like Twin Peaks with that ring they put on the finger.
Yeah, it is.
Anyway,
That's funny. On the same day, King Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman, the foe of the Jews, to Queen Esther. As for Mordecai, he came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her. The king took off his ring that he had reclaimed from Haman and bestowed it on Mordecai. And Esther appointed Mordecai to oversee Haman's house. Then Esther pleaded again before the king and fell down before his feet. She wept and supplicated him to avert the evil plotted by Haman the Agagite and his devising that he had devised against the Jews. When the king held out the golden scepter to Esther, then Esther arose and stood before the king. And she said, "If it seems good to the king, and if I have found favor before him, and the request seems right before the king, and I am well pleasing in his eyes, let a decree be written to reverse the letters, the devising of Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, those which he wrote to destroy the Jews in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see this peril that is coming upon my people? And how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred?" Yeah.
well,
King
Haman also
Ahasuerus.
sounds like Paul. Haman sounds like Paul to destroy the Jews or the new Christians in
Ooh,
Jerusalem.
yeah, yeah. That's another good point.
I'm sorry, just rambling here.
It's a good type of like an early Saul.
Mhm.
King Ahasuerus replied to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, "Behold, I have given Haman's house to Esther, and they hanged him on the gallows, because he put forth his hand against the Jews. As for you, write on behalf of the Jews as seems best in your eyes. Write in the king's name and seal it with the king's ring. For a writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring cannot be reversed." I'd like a bit of a study on ring there, see the motif, because I've only seen it in the last little bit. Maybe also the figure of the scepter throughout the Old Testament would be interesting.
Yeah, both of those words.
Yeah, I might look into that as I fall asleep. For a writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring cannot be reversed. So the king's scribes, this is the longest verse in the Bible. So the king's scribes were called at that time in the third month, that is, the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day of it. All was written just as Mordecai had instructed them to the Jews and to the satraps, the viceroys and chief officials of all the provinces, in 127 provinces, from India unto Kush, to each province in its provincial writing, and to each people in his popular tongue, and to the Jews in their writing and in their tongue. Mordecai wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, sealed with the king's ring, and sent letters by means of courtiers on horseback, riding the stallions of the royal service, those bred of its stud mares. By these letters the king granted the Jews who were in every place, city by city, the right to assemble and to stand up for their souls, to exterminate, to kill, and to destroy every armed unit of any people or province that might besiege them, their little ones or their women, and that might plunder the loot of them. On a single day, in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, that is, the month of Adar. A transcript of the written text was to be promulgated as an edict in all the different provinces and was to be revealed to all the peoples, that the Jews would be equipped for this day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers riding the stallions of the royal service rode forth, speeding up post haste by order of the king, and the edict was promulgated in the castle of Susa. As for Mordecai, he went forth from before the king in royal clothing of blue and pale cotton, wearing a magnified coronet of gold and a cloak of fine linen and purple wool. And Susa city was noisy with rejoicing. For the Jews there was light with rejoicing, elation, and esteem. Also, in every place of the different provinces and in each of the different cities to which the king's order and his edict were attaining, there was rejoicing and elation for the Jews, with feasting and a cheerful day. And many of the peoples of the country were professing themselves Jews, for awesome fear of the Jews had fallen on them. This is a complete reversal of a long plot line throughout the Old Testament.
Wow.
In the 12th month, that is, the month of Adar, on the 13th day of it, when the king's order and his edict attained to be executed, on that day to which the enemies of the Jews had looked forward so as to domineer over them, then this was overturned, in that the Jews themselves domineered over those hating them. In all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, the Jews had assembled in their cities to lay hand on those seeking to exact evil on them. No man could stand before them, for awesome fear had fallen on all the peoples. All the chief officials of the provinces, the satraps and the viceroys, those conducting the king's business, were assisting the Jews, for awesome fear of Mordecai had fallen on them.
I would say this is a type of the body of Christ dealing with the celestials, wouldn't you?
Yes, I 100% see that.
Yeah.
I can definitely see that.
That's all. Continue. We can keep going.
For Mordecai's influence was great in the king's house, and his fame was spreading in all the provinces as the influence of the man Mordecai became towering. The Jews smote all their enemies with the smiting of the sword, with killing and destruction. They did to those hating them as was acceptable to them. In the castle of Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. Also, Harshandatha, Dalphon, and Aspatha, Poratha, Adalia, and Aradatha, Parmashta, Arisai, Aradai, and Vaizatha, the 10 sons of Haman, son of Hammedatha, the foe of the Jews. They killed them. They did not lay their hand on the plunder. On the same day, the number of those killed in the castle of Susa came before the king. This is important because the kill was not for looting. It wasn't for a physical reason.
Right. Not about the plunder.
Yeah. On the same day, the number of those killed in the castle of Susa came before the king. The king said to Queen Esther, in the castle of Susa alone, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the remainder of the king's provinces? Now, what is your request? It shall be granted to you. And what is your other urgent appeal? It shall also be done. Esther answers, if it seems good to the king, let it be granted to the Jews in Susa to execute also tomorrow according to the edict for today, and let them hang the bodies of the 10 sons of Haman on the gallows. So the king ordered it to be done in this way. An edict was issued in Susa, and they hanged the 10 sons of Haman. The Jews in Susa assembled again on the 14th day of the month of Adar and killed 300 men in Susa, but they did not lay their hand on the plunder. The remainder of the Jews in the king's provinces had assembled to stand up for their souls and to find rest from their enemies. They killed 75,000 of those hating them, but they did not lay their hand on the plunder. That was on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and they came to rest on the 14th day of it, and made it a day of feasting and rejoicing. As for the Jews in Susa, they had assembled both on the 13th day of it and on the 14th day of it. And they came to rest on the 15th day of it and made it a day of feasting and rejoicing. Therefore, the rural Jews, those dwelling in unwalled villages, were observing the 14th day of the month of Adar as a day of rejoicing and feasting, and a cheerful day for the sending of assigned shares, each man to his associate. Mordecai wrote up these things and sent letters to all the Jews, those who were near and far, in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, to make it mandatory for them to keep on observing it annually, the 14th day of the month of Adar, the 15th day of it, in every year as the days on which the Jews found rest from their enemies, and as the month when it turned for them from affliction to rejoicing, and from a mourning to a cheerful day, to observe them as days of feasting and rejoicing, and the sending of assigned shares, each man to his associate, and gifts to the needy. The Jews made customary what they had started to practice and what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the foe of all the Jews, had devised against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast Pur, that is, the lot, to discomfit them and to destroy them. But when it came before the king, this is like the so what, and so what we have learned applies to our lives today. God has a lot to say in his book. This is God, essentially. So, what was the theme? For Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the foe of all the Jews, had devised against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast Pur, that is, the lot, to discomfit them and to destroy them. But when it came before the king, he ordered with a letter that his evil devising that he had devised against the Jews should get back on his own head, and so they hanged him and his sons on the gallows. Therefore they called these days Purim, by the name of the purge. Therefore, because of all the instructions of this letter, and of what they had faced as to this matter, and of what had attained to them, the Jews confirmed this, and made it customary for themselves, and for their seed, and for all joining them as proselytes, that they should not trespass. They ought to keep on observing annually these 2 days in accord with their written text, and at their stated time in every year. These days should be remembered and observed by all, generation after generation, family after family, province after province, and city after city. These days of Purim should never pass away from the midst of the Jews, and their remembrance should not terminate among their seed. Also Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, along with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full enforcement to confirm this second letter of Purim. So letters were sent to all the Jews, and to the 127 provinces in Ahasuerus' kingdom, in words of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim at their stated times, just as Mordecai the Jew, along with Queen Esther, had set these up for them, and just as they had made mandatory the instructions of fastings in their outcry for their own soul and for their seed. Thus Esther's order confirmed these details of Purim, and it was written down in a scroll. King Ahasuerus imposed a tribute on the mainland and the islands of the sea. All the achievements of his might and his masterful deeds, and the exact statement of Mordecai's greatness, whom the king had magnified, are they not written in the scroll of records, the days of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was second to King Ahasuerus, and towering among the Jews, and held dear by many of his brothers. He sought after the good for his people, and spoke up for the well-being of all his seed. Beautiful.
Well, there you go. I've seen those things of like the modern Jews celebrating Purim, where they beat the effigy of a little Palestinian child or something.
Uh,
It's like
yeah.
they're missing the whole point of the story, right? To celebrate
Yeah.
this Purim thing.
Yeah.
So it's funny how God works.
No, absolutely.
That is a wonderful ending to the story. I think God is a romantic, I think, at heart. I know where Mr. Martin gets it from. Not your dad,
Mhm.
even though I guess where he gets it from now too.
George R.R. You're talking about?
I guess both, really.
Yeah. No, it's so great. Like that everything that we go through in life is informed by this past reality, which is actually absolute truth of God. And people get confused about, like the current day Jews, that some of them are actually really Jews, some of them are not. They're just beating this effigy on Purim because they're missing the point of the story. To celebrate these victories. The point of the story was really that God was sneaking himself into the hierarchies and structures of humanity, and that because Esther was there, because Mordecai was there, the truth of God was revealed in this, in this Old Testament story about kingship. And it reveals a lot about what we know about Christ and God's total purpose. It's not about what the Jews think now.
Right. Yeah, I'm gonna use the bathroom real quick. I gotta go. And I'm probably gonna get a water real quick. This is only 6 pages, so I'm gonna read this real quick. This should be like a 10-minute thing.
Yeah, I want to go to bed soon too, but I'll hang out if you want to read that.
Yeah, give me like 2 minutes tops.
All right. Hey guys, I'm taking over Steven's channel right now. He doesn't know what I'm saying. I'm going to take over and say, I agree with Steven.
So I hear someone's taking over my channel.
That's me. You heard what I
Yep.
said, though, right?
Time to boot you. No. Agree or not agree? Yeah, okay. Let's read the Book of Esther. Not the whole book all over again. Just the commentary on the Book of Esther now by Vladimir Gelesnoff. I'm gonna probably put a timestamp up here in case someone doesn't feel like listening to us ramble about Esther for 2 hours. But if you're
I'm
interested,
gonna go. I'm gonna go in half an hour.
yeah. No, this will be done before then. So the Book of Esther. This is part 2 of a 3-part study called the Book of Esther. Out of the eater came forth meat. The machinations of Haman were eminently successful. His preparation for a wholesale massacre of the Jews proceeded with clockwork precision and without a hitch. Not only did he cause a rupture between the Jews and the Persian government, but the Jews lay completely at his mercy. Yeah, the king endorsed the daring plan of his favorite. He said to Haman, "The silver is given you, the people also, to do with them as it seems good to you." In chapter 3, verse 11. Great was the consternation produced by the publishing of the decree of extermination. And in every province, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting and weeping and wailing. And many lay in sackcloth and ashes. Gloom and despair reigned everywhere among the Jews. They were appalled, perplexed, and driven to despair. In their distress, they forgot, as his people are ever liable to do, that the impending crisis was no surprise to God, but the working out of a premeditated plan, the fruitage and ripe forethought of ages. His wisdom had shaped every event to foil the adversary project. The story of this dispensation of divine providence hinges upon 2 trivial incidents. 1, a drunken act, chapter 1, verse 10, and 2, a sleepless act in chapter 6, verse 1. These were the occasions which led to the elevation of Esther and Mordecai. On the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman and Biztha, Harbona, Bigtho, and Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcas, the 7 chamberlains that ministered in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the peoples and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to look on. Esther 1, verses 10 and 11. The youthful king Lemuel had thus been taught by his mother, "It is not for kings, O Lemuel, it is not for kings to drink wine, nor for princes to say, where is strong drink, lest they drink and forget the law, and pervert the judgment of any that is afflicted." Proverbs 31, verses 4 and 5. Here we see the sad consequences flowing from the violation of this golden rule. Overcome by the fumes of the sparkling liquid, the king forgets the law and violates the precepts of decency. In the hands of God, this foolish act provoked the key which unlocked the door to Esther and secured through her a foothold for her Jewish interests at court. Involved in the drunken act of Ahasuerus are 6 events connected like the links of a chain and culminating in the crowning of Esther. Vashti is summoned in chapter 1, verses 11. She disobeys in chapter 1, verse 12. She's deposed in chapter 1, verse 19. There's an advisement to elect a new queen in chapter 2, verses 2 through 4. Esther enters the royal house in 2:16. Esther is crowned in 2:17 and 18. This chain of events, as subsequent developments attest, bridged the cleavage between the throne and the Jews. Esther became the binding link between the estranged parties, and through her the threads of God's purpose and the interests of Israel were securely tied to the Persian throne. Long before the outbreak of anti-Jewish feelings, the modesty and beauty of a daughter of Israel had cast a potent, fascinating spell over the erratic monarch and won his heart. The official attitude of the throne toward its Jewish subjects changed when Ahasuerus issued a decree counteracting the one previously published by Haman. In reality, however, its attitude changed the moment the king loved Esther above all women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. In chapter 2, verse 17. Like the royal choice of Esther, the promotion of Mordecai is the climax of a sequence of 6 events, which had their root in that night when sleep fled from the king. One is the reading of the court records in chapter 6, verse 1, and Mordecai's merit is remembered in chapter 6, verses 2 and 3. The third event is Ahasuerus decides to honor him in chapter 6, verse 6. The fourth event is Haman prescribes the honor in chapter 6, verses 8 and 9. 5 is Mordecai's elevation in 6:11. And then the 6th point is the decree in favor of the Jews, the beginning of chapter 8. We have seen that Haman exerted a potent influence on the king, that he framed his policies and virtually steered the ship of state. His evil influence and activity are offset by Esther and Mordecai. Esther exerts a pressure which turns the king's heart to the support of the Jews, while her cousin directs state policy and alters its course. There's an exquisite touch in the construction of the narrative which should not be overlooked. The adversary influenced Ahasuerus in his normal state. God carried out his pleasure when he was heated by wine or suffering from insomnia. In other words, Haman ruled the voluntary acts of the sovereign proceeding from conscious reflection. God overruled and worked through his involuntary acts emanating from a disordered condition of the brain. And now let us notice the Yeah, that's what I mean by like God is so demonstrating himself sovereign throughout this entire story.
Mm-hmm.
And now let us notice the intervening adverse move, Haman's rise to power. This promotion is related after the declaration that information furnished by Mordecai successfully frustrated the attempt of Bigthan and Teresh to kill the king. It is introduced as follows. After these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and advanced him, and set his seat above the princes that were with him. In chapter 3, verse 1. This seems to bring into relevancy the contrasted position of the 2 men at court. Like most court favorites of ancient and modern times, Haman owed his promotion to the monarch's caprice. Such relationships are insecure in the very nature of things. Born in a moment of excitement, they fade away as soon as the first impulse wears off. There's nothing surprising, therefore, in the sudden change of Ahasuerus towards his erstwhile favorite on the night of the fatal banquet. Mordecai's position, on the other hand, was founded on the bedrock of merit, increased in stability and power, notwithstanding the fickleness of his sovereign. For Mordecai the Jew was next unto King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and accepted of all the multitude of his brethren, seeking the good of his people, and speaking peace to all his seed. In chapter 10, verse 3. The manner of his elevation was but a parody of God's bringing his instruments to power. It is a mere counterpart in evil of what God had accomplished for good. It originates in a king's whim and culminates in the order to destroy the Jews. One is Haman's promotion in chapter 3, verse 1. Two is the king's decree concerning him in chapter 3, verse 2. The third point is Mordecai's refusal to bow to Haman in chapter 3, verse 2. Fourth is Haman's hatred of the Jews in chapter 3, verse 4. The fifth is Haman's conspiracy in chapter 3, verse 5 and 6. And the sixth point is the decree of extermination in chapter 3, verse 12. We've already seen that Haman's elevation is preceded by the crowning of Esther and followed by the exaltation of Mordecai. By tabulating the three chains of events in parallel columns and in their order, we will be able to see their interrelation and follow the steps by which Haman's scheme had been anticipated and frustrated.
Well, so that's like Satan sending Christ to the cross, right?
Yep.
Anticipated and frustrated. Anticipated in that he did what he did, but frustrated by the fact that even though he killed Christ on the cross, it turned out well for all humanity. In the story, it turns out well for the Jews in captivity. They were almost living like it's almost like they had their story of like gallivanting around, being kings on the earth. They're living out Aeonian times, basically,
Right.
right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Man, this is really beautiful. I love that this is like a practical demonstration of God's sovereignty all the way through. He does not use his name. Does not use his name here. Not one single time. That is just incredible. Number 1 shows that the call of Vashti and the reading of the court records were preparatory stages leading to the elevation of the instruments who were to overthrow and replace the insolent Agagite. In number 2, side by side with the order that all should bow down before Haman, the king remembers Vashti in chapter 2, verse 1, and is reminded of Mordecai's deed in chapter 6, verse 1. These three events exhibit various forms of prostituted power. In the case of Vashti, it is power abused. In the case of Mordecai, it is power unused. In the case of Haman, it's power misused. Number 3 pictures the evil resulting from the above misdoings. The abuse of power provoked Vashti's resentment. Its misuse compelled Mordecai to disregard the king's commandment and cause friction with the Jews. In number 4, along with the outburst of Haman's wrath against the Jews, we have the advice of the courtiers to elect a queen better than Vashti, and the advice of Haman to confer the highest distinction on the man whom the king delights to honor. In both instances, the honors fall to the Jews. Esther is made queen, and Mordecai is elevated to the viziership. From number 5, we learn that Haman's plot had been forestalled by the installment of Esther in the king's favor, and its miscarriage further safeguarded by the exaltation of Mordecai. And number 6 is concerned with decrees relating to the coronation of Esther, the destruction of the Jews, and their protection. Wow. So I love how he started that off with kind of a recollection of the events and then tied all of the events together to demonstrate the sovereignty of God. Very powerful presentation
Mm-hmm.
in its simplicity, really. And I'm
Yeah, I
sure the
like
last part is going to focus on the result in chapters 8 through 10.
something he said there. I forget exactly what it was, but that people doing things through action, whereas Mordecai was holding back, not doing action. Like Mordecai in the situation is actually the man of faith. He's like sitting back, waiting for God to do, whereas Haman is the one doing in the flesh. And I forget the third character in that situation. Like,
Vashti, its power abused. Mordecai, its
right.
power unused. And Haman, its power misused. Yeah, that was one of my favorite lines, too.
Yeah. That's what I got from it. And I mean, just reading all this together with you, I missed the first part because I came in late, but just to know that all this stuff is exactly, it's a picture of what God is doing at large with everything, that Mordecai is actually a Christ figure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a very solid contrast. Faith and works and abuse of works.
Hmm.
We have hit the 2-hour mark. I'm
All
exhausted.
right. Yeah.
I'm going to have to go to sleep now because I've got to get up in 5 hours.
Same
And
here.
yeah, I thankfully it's not going to be a long day, but it's going to be a day. So,
All right,
uh,
Stephen, brother. Thanks for having me along. I hope I haven't distracted from what you're talking about, but it's been fun to
nah,
talk about all this stuff.
you were right on time.
All right. God bless you, brother. Have a good night.
Good night, Gabe. Stay safe, and thank you for any stragglers coming in and taking a look too, and listening to us here going through Esther and the second article in the book Esther series, and also the third article in the volume 2 of the Unsearchable Riches. The next one that we will take on will be the acts we will press on in that series. This will be the first discussion of the acts in the second volume. So that will be fun to look forward to.
Isn't it so nice to have the interpretation of Paul, not interpretation, but the truth of Paul, to look back at all this stuff and see it with like wide eyes, like holy shit. Isn't it
Yeah,
cool just to look back like this?
we have a nice little perch called Paul's Letters that we sit atop, and I will not like I don't know how to express to people more clearly that no matter what freaking happens to me, no matter what people say, no matter what people do, no matter how people think, what people think of me, what I think of them, doesn't matter.
Hmm.
I mean, it matters relatively in a perfect way, the way that we see demonstrated with Esther, but it doesn't matter in the sense that I'm never going to waver from the foundation of Paul's epistles. It's never going to happen. It's going to remain. It's
Yeah.
never going to die. And I'm going to have to deal with shit for it. Every other day I deal with shit for it. I take shit for it. I can't change that, really. There's nothing I can do about it this time. What we
We know,
have is
yeah, we
grace.
know the end of the movie. So why are we
Yeah,
pretending like we don't, why would we go back once we know?
there's no reason.
Paul tells
But
us everything. Anyway, yeah.
he answers everything and recontextualizes what we thought we knew.
Amen.
And it's just that simple. Paul starts. Should today anyone who wants to read the Bible, don't start with Matthew. Don't start with Genesis. Don't start with the freaking like the First Kings, Second Kings. Don't start with the Psalms. Don't start with the Proverbs. Don't start by reading it in chronological order. Don't start with Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Don't go to Revelation to try to start at the end and work your way backwards. No. Start with the apostle God says he gives to you. Paul, the apostle of the nations. Romans 11:13. Galatians 2, 7 and 8, Romans 15, 8 and 9, and Romans 15, 16. And the clear, giant look at me signs propping themselves up in the middle of the New Testament called Romans, the letter written to the nation that murdered the Messiah, the different nation that is not the Jews. Start with Romans, for Paul is the man whom God appointed to you. If you trust God on the matter, I guarantee you, you will realize the truth of life, of life as we know it, of the purpose of evil, of the nature of God, of the plan and purpose of God, the deity of God, the sovereignty of God, the headship of Christ, the beauty of his son, the nature of the sacrifice. There's so many different dimensions and aspects to it that are lost very quickly. That the only reason that anyone would ever say, "Oh, God's just quiet now," is because they're ignoring the words that he gave them. It's in Romans. Read it, enjoy it. Grace and peace.
All is ours. All is ours, right?